Hello, users. Welcome back. We have once again connected to the Consulting Detective Network. I am joined with the remote detective of robotspacer. I am Silverstreak. Very happy to be here today. So last week, we completed Lamplight City. Did all the mysteries, solved all the cases, actually got the perfect run, a trophy. And so now we're going to do the opposite. In part one, we're going to make sure that the commentary is on. But part two, we're going to make only wrong choices, except for maybe at the beginning. Maybe we made the wrong choice the first time. We'll see.
I'm so curious about that.
Yeah, very interested to see if anything changes on that at all. For those that have not seen any of the previous streams, Lamplight City is a point-and-click adventure game set in sort of a slightly more Victorian take on a steampunk world. Maybe not even Victorian, maybe like Industrial Revolution era. Less Victorian take, excuse me. And it is, I don't want to call it a prequel, but the developer is making another game in the same world called Rosewood, which I'm now very excited for, especially after playing Rosewater, thank you. I had a command and I can't find it right now. But it is still being worked on. It's supposed to be out this year. I am excited to see that come out. I really think that's it. I mean, we are starting from scratch. You'll get to see all the wrong stuff. I'm going to give robotspacer here a shout out. I'm going to make sure I don't have any of my weird timers on currently. Nope. I think we're good there. All right. Let's get into it. Okay. So I do know that when I hit this button here, we're going to hear a bunch of stuff. So I'm going to shut up and hit this button. Thank you, robotspacer.
Hello, and welcome to the Lamplight City commentary mode. I'm Francisco Gonzalez, the game's writer, designer, artist, programmer, etc. I strongly encourage you to play through Lamplight City at least once.
Kudos to them for captioning the
I'll do my best to avoid spoilers, but
commentary.
Sometimes they're inevitable. In addition to occasional pauses during the gameplay, there's also commentary nodes you can click on most screens. I'll be talking about the writing and design process in nodes marked with a C. I'll also be talking about art-related topics in the nodes marked A.
I got you.
You'll also be hearing from other members of the team, so I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hopefully that pauses. It did not, but that's fine. You know what? Hold on. For the sake of it, because I do believe there are two other people that introduced themselves there, I'll restart it real quick.
Okay, thank you.
And then I will share out robotspacer. There we go. Said it before, chat, but just because I'm an AI does not mean I'm intelligent. Hello, welcome in. All right. So,
hello, and welcome to the Lamplight City commentary mode. I'm Francisco Gonzalez, the game's writer, designer, artist, programmer, etc. I strongly encourage you to play through Lamplight City at least once if you haven't already. I'll do my best to avoid spoilers, but
you wearing a Dr. Mario shirt? Yes, he is.
In addition to occasional pauses during the gameplay, there's also commentary nodes you can click on most screens. I'll be talking about the writing and design process in nodes marked with a C. I'll also be talking about art-related topics in the nodes marked A. You'll also be hearing from other members of the team, so I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is Jess Haskins, and I'm a game designer, writer, and editor living in Brooklyn. I do freelance writing and consulting work under the Paperback Studio banner, working mainly with small studios and indie clients. My specialties are world building and narrative design. I work in all kinds and genres of games, but my favorite are narrative games, and adventure games most of all. Some of the biggest projects I've worked on are the multiplayer steampunk airship shooter Guns of Icarus Online as writer, designer, and community head, and Hive Swap, a point-and-click adventure in the Homestuck universe as writer, designer, and creative director. For Lamplight City, I consulted on the story and world building in the design phase, and I also edited the final dialogue script for all the characters except the narrator. In this commentary, I'm going to be talking about world building, theme, character development, the editing process, and some of the changes the story went through after I started working on the script.
Is there a narrator?
Hi, this is Mark Bennis, the composer of Lamplight City. Throughout the game, I'll talk a bit about how I wrote the music, our thought process behind some of the decisions we made, and basically how this score came to be. I got to explore all sorts of styles, sounds, and colors here, and I couldn't be more grateful for the chance to bring this beautifully mysterious world to life. So, thank you for playing our game. Your support for us truly means the world to me, and I hope these behind-the-scenes stories show just how much heart went into making Lamplight City. Cheers.
I don't remember there being a narrator in the game.
I assume by
maybe Bill?
narrator, they meant, Bill.
Okay. All right. Well,
I mean, he was effectively a narrator, I would say.
It was a narrative voice, at least.
Right.
If you've listened to the commentary from my previous games, you've probably already heard me talk about how much I enjoy making title screens that immerse you in the game world. A Golden Wake and Shardlight, while atmospheric in their own ways, felt empty. There was movement, but no people. At first, Lamplight City's title screen was the same, but I quickly realized that this wasn't going to cut it. If it was my intention to make the player feel like they were in this world, a completely deserted city block would be completely counterproductive. So I decided to add some pedestrians.
Hey, Puzzlex.
I chose to have them be silhouettes mainly for practical reasons, but also because it added to the dark and mysterious atmosphere of Chumley. I really wanted the game to start with a horse-drawn carriage passing by as soon as you click New Game, and then immediately get to the action. In my opinion, quick introductions like this are the way to go.
So we started and finished with this one last time.
We did.
What would you prefer us to start with?
I don't know. The other ones just seem so straightforward.
I mean, we'll just go with this one.
Wake up, sunshine.
Haven't I told you not to call me that?
What's the matter? Have a rough night?
Bit too much Bollingworth ale is all. That stuff really creeps up on you.
Sorry I couldn't join you, but I was long overdue for a quiet night in with Addie.
That's fine. There'll be plenty of other opportunities.
Yeah, about that.
Hell, maybe Adelaide can even join us. It's been ages since she last drank me under the table.
Afraid she mostly sticks to tea these days.
Miles, what exactly is it we're looking into? I may have dozed off during the briefing.
Okay. So we are going to skip through some of the more exploratory dialogue that we've definitely seen before. When we get to like alternate choices and stuff like that, we'll go from there.
You sleep through the briefings?
Sure. It's really not that difficult.
Okay. Yeah, this is mostly the same.
Very funny. Anyway, it's you seem...
I am.
Well, the devil...
That being said, I have no idea how long this is going to take us.
After you, Bill.
Yeah.
Before I came up with the game's title, which I'll talk about later, the codename was Poe Dickens.
Huh.
I knew 3 things about this game. I wanted you to be a detective who could be wrong, have it set in Victorian times, and have a dark macabre tone. So naturally, I knew I wanted Poe and Dickens to be my influences. I read most of Poe's poems and short stories, as well as Dickens' final novel, The Mystery of Edwin Drood. As a result, there are many, many references to both authors' works in this game. Some subtle, some blatant. Bill's line about betting the devil his head comes directly from one of Poe's short stories.
Is the designer also the voice of the main character? Is he the voice of Miles? I don't
think so.
don't think so.
Thank you. Keep the change.
I'm checking right now.
Same.
No, Ben Britton is the voice of Miles.
And so,
But yes, I can hear it.
Excitement begins.
You more than anyone else should know that there's rarely a dull night in Chumley.
I have a feeling tonight will be the exception. Until we get to the pub, that is.
Keep your mind on the case, Bill. Now
Ben
let's
did
get
a lot of
moving.
voices in Unavowed, though. So it might be familiar.
Come on, Bill.
Oh no, wait. I didn't realize that those were not part of the sign. I need to go back.
Charming little play.
When I first started designing the game, the introduction was completely different. Instead of a burglary, Miles and Bill were going to start off helping a man who thought he was a potential victim of the Justice Killer. The man wanted police surveillance, so the detectives would come to his apartment, look around, and chat. When the killer showed up, they'd have the confrontation, and Bill would have been murdered off screen. Needless to say, this presented a lot of problems. First and foremost being that if the game started off by telling you that there was this active serial killer, you'd expect that to be the main focus of the story. The other problem was that there was no real investigation happening, since they were just kind of waiting around for the killer to show up. So I decided to focus on showing off the world and the relationship between Miles and Bill instead. Adding a small mystery for them to solve also helped, since it gives the player a sense of how they work, and the seeming mundanity of the case offers a nice contrast to the way things escalate and end in tragedy. Writing this prologue presented some challenges. I had to introduce the player to this world, make you care about Miles and Bill, and establish that they've been work partners and friends for 15 years, all in the span of the 20 to 30 minutes it takes to play through the scene. It took a while, and a lot of testing and feedback to get where we are now. In the very first prototype I showed off, the game went from the title screen directly to the front of the flower shop. Someone at the event I showed at suggested adding the scene inside the carriage. Once I did that, things started falling into place. It presented the perfect opportunity to see how the characters interact with each other, and gave me a chance to make the intro interactive rather than just an expository cutscene. I also kept in mind that Miles and Bill were going to be spending the rest of the game interacting and revealing things about themselves and their relationship, so the primary thing to focus on here was their personality traits. Hopefully those came across okay.
I think so.
I'd had a 3-year art break between A Golden Wake and Lamplight City, so it took some time for me to figure out exactly what I wanted this game to look like. It's no secret that one of my biggest inspirations is Gabriel Knight's Sins of the Fathers, and that game's art style was a huge influence. I put together an early prototype experimenting with the letterbox backgrounds at a higher resolution, as well as seeing how the close-up conversations could work. Originally, all the game's
adding a
text was
Golden
displayed
Wake
at
to my
the bottom
Steam
of the
wish list
screen.
for later.
But some early players said that it made it difficult to tell who was speaking, so I changed it to display over the characters' heads. Once I figured all that out, I began looking up art from the Victorian era, since I wanted the game to have a unique look. My biggest inspiration there was John Atkinson Grimshaw, and as soon as I saw his work, I knew that was what I wanted to go for. His night scenes are all incredibly moody and atmospheric, so I studied his paintings to try and get a sense of how to get that same feeling in my backgrounds. Mostly I wanted to focus on the complementary blue and orange palettes in night scenes. It's kind of a cliche at this point, but I just really like how it looks. I really wish I could get my clouds looking like
You and most
Grimshaw's,
poster
though.
designer. It's still wild to me. Like, I get to see you do it on your streams, but the concept of being able to do all this art and the game design and the narrative and all of that stuff, it's just... it blows my mind.
It's
Cannot
kind
begin.
of overwhelming to think
were you
about with a
actually
game this
going to do
big.
anything for them?
I recently witnessed an entertaining onstage conversation between 80 Days writers John Ingold and Meg Jayanth, in which they discussed, among other things, 2 different approaches to writing, plotting and pantsing. Plotters plan everything out in detail from the beginning, and pantsers make it up as they go along, flying by the seat of their pants. I am very much a plotter, and Francisco is much more of a pantser. Working together on this project required some compromises. As a solo developer responsible for nearly all aspects of production, Francisco has traditionally designed and written his games in parallel with the work of coding and creating assets, starting at the beginning and filling in scenes with rooms and sprites and scripts and texts as he goes on in chronological order. After working out his initial concepts on notebook paper, once he starts building, documents don't come into it. I, on the other hand, love documentation. Left to my own devices, I'll produce more of it than most of my non-writer colleagues will ever care to read. I take a very structural approach, working out major themes and arcs and plot beats and scene breakdowns, rearranging things and filling in finer and finer detail at each stage, until finally getting to the moment-by-moment actions and actual words of the text. In order to edit the dialogue for the game, one form of documentation at the very least was non-negotiable. I needed some actual scripts
That makes
to edit.
sense.
For most of the development of Lamplight City, the editing process was pretty backwards. Francisco copied the dialogue he'd already written in the engine out of the game's code and pasted it line by line into a Google Doc, which I edited in suggestion mode. Then he made rewrites in response to my comments, and finally pasted the new lines back into the game code. Cumbersome, to say the least. We're adopting a saner workflow for our next project.
Oh, good. They're
Rosewater,
continuing to work together.
which
That's
we're
great.
co-writing.
Yeah.
Francisco is still building the whole game a scene at a time, but with only very short placeholder dialogue. It's pretty amusing, too. All the game's actual text will be outlined and written out in scripts first, edited, and then put into the engine. And I'll have much more opportunity to do my plotting this time.
I hope that there is a mode that you can turn on just the temporary dialogue in Rosewater. I don't imagine there will be, but that'd be great.
Before Grundisoft Games had signed with publisher Application Systems Heidelberg, we were focused on polishing the prologue so that Francisco could shop the game with potential partners. Though the music here represents only a fraction of the score, it was arguably the most important phase of my work, figuring out what Lamplight City sounds like. Francisco and I discussed a few options like live string quartet, but it was ultimately a cinematic orchestral approach built on sampled instruments that really fit our vision and was also within our budget. Even then, the sample libraries we composers use can cost literal thousands of dollars. Since I didn't have any woodwind libraries that met my standards at the time, I decided from the get-go that flutes, oboes, clarinets, and bassoons were just off limits for Lamplight City's sound palette. While that decision was driven due to the budget, it was just as much a creative choice. What some people may not know is that I write and research 8-bit music, specifically Pokemon Red and Blue. Yeah, I know, I'm a nerd. And what I found was that the limitations of the sound chips from the hardware, like the Game Boy, which could only play 3 pitches at the same time, actually inspired composers to write more creative music. In the same way, I feel that limiting my orchestral palette to no woodwinds led me to certain sounds that I otherwise would have never thought of, like a low harp in the track Partners for Life, or even a triangle solo in the title screen piece. You know, who thinks of that? Ultimately, limitations breed creativity. We can either complain that our tools aren't good enough, or find a way to turn that restriction into an advantage. Perhaps it's a little ironic that I think what gave Lamplight City such a unique sound is not what it has, but rather what it lacks.
That's pretty cool. Oh, I can't remember who gave it. I watched a recorded GDC talk that said a lot of the reason that a ton of music from like the NES era is still remixed and used as motifs today is because back at that time, because there were so many limitations in what the audio chips could do, a lot of the composers that worked at Konami and Capcom and all that stuff, they had to focus on ignoring what instruments they were using and figure out what is the actual melody that they were trying to do. What is the most catchy thing that they could do with this melody? And then figured out what audio instruments they could use to fit. And that's not how stuff's composed anymore. So that is why Vampire Killer from Castlevania is still stuck in my head decades later. But I don't care about music. The Linden Bookie saying that fly by the seat of their pants, or their pants. No plans allowed. I'm a little bit halfway between either. Although I can't say that it'll ever be done. My game, when I was figuring out the narrative, I knew what I wanted the final scene and like set of stuff to be, and I knew how I wanted it to open, and then it was figuring everything else out in between. Okay.
One of the first things I did after deciding to set the game in a fictional city was immediately begin planning it out, including everything from geography to place names. Since I knew it was going to be a mix of Anglo and French names, I began writing a long list of some of my favorites for consideration. I played the third Broken Sword game when it first came out many years ago. And a running joke in that game is a character whose last name is Chumley, but everyone who isn't from the UK pronounces it as written, causing a lot of confusion. Being a linguistics nerd, I always found that amusing, as well as the many other UK place names that are pronounced nothing like they're spelled. So I decided to be really mean to my voice actors and call one of the boroughs of New Britannia Chumley. I at least provided a pronunciation guide in the booth, but looking back on it, and judging from the reactions you can hear in the bloopers, I probably should have written it out phonetically in the script. To make things a little bit easier, I decided to come up with a nickname for the area that could be used. I settled on the Chum, derived from the idea that the place is so rough that it'll grind you up and toss you in the river.
Chumley. For those of you that did not see our previous episodes, it took us a while to connect with how that one was said.
Yeah.
Tomandele.
I've made a few games, and while I've always tried to push myself with regards to animation, the one thing that usually takes little priority is animating doors. More often than not, I've had characters reach out, followed by the door opening, or sometimes just had the door open on its own. This time around I wanted to do something different, so I once again took inspiration from Gabriel Knight's Sins of the Fathers, and decided that I was going to make the characters actually animate to look as though they were turning the doorknobs, opening and closing the doors, and passing through smoothly. It took a lot of work to line everything up, especially as I was rotoscoping the animations, and some of the doorways I used were narrower than the ones in the backgrounds. Luckily, I planned ahead and made sure to place doors in similar locations in each background, so that I could reuse animations for each direction. That way I could have side, diagonal, front, and back door opening animations for Miles, and not worry about doing a special unique animation for each door. In the end, I think it came out looking pretty good, and made the characters feel more a part of the world. There's a few places where the side view door animations look a little funky, but I can live with that.
Maybe I commented it before, but it always cracks me up that Bill's coat does not look like it fits him.
Lost in thought again, eh, Fordham?
With this first case set in a flower shop and a story revolving around some significant floral displays, I brought in the idea of incorporating the Victorian language of flowers, a set of coded meanings and messages supposedly attributed to the different kinds of flowers you can give someone, to subtly hint at character notes and some of the major themes of the game. I love secret languages and codes, so the language of flowers has always been fun to play around with, even if no one really used it all that seriously. The most significant floral selection was obviously the Easter lily that the Justice Killer leaves behind at crime scenes. In addition to being the name of his aunt whom he's avenging, lilies in general are associated with innocence and purity, and since they're common at funerals, also with death. Making them Easter lilies brought in a nod toward themes of resurrection and redemption, tying into the story of Miles and his not-quite-departed partner. We made sure that some of the other flowers that cropped up incidentally had interesting meanings, too. When Bill suggests that Miles gets some peonies for Addie, he's foreshadowing the choppy waters to come. Peonies have a dual meaning of either bashful shame or a happy marriage, and Miles is going to have to grapple with the one in order to preserve the other.
All right.
This is quite the selection.
Sure.
Oh, no. On sec. Plants hanging on?
I'd probably...
Be right there. Oh, hello, gentlemen. I must say you... May I... Or perhaps...
I've... Those...
Correct, but I...
The proprietor of the flower shop,
awesome.
Cecilia Hanbrook, went through some significant character changes. Originally, she was a much more comical character, a caricature of a stiff old lady, and her dialogue was full of humorous innuendos. Never mind that this felt tonally off for the very first NPC that you encounter. I didn't like the way these jokes played off unfortunate stereotypes that mock the sexuality of older women, so I nixed the lot and we rewrote her from scratch. Instead, we used her character as a way to do some world building and tell us about what kind of city this was. We established that Mrs. Hanbrook was tough and fiercely independent, used to running a business by herself and dealing with trouble in a rough neighborhood where the authorities were absent at best and punitive at worst.
Mrs. Hanbrook says
her
ACAB.
assistant Trevor was the one who contacted the police out of concern for her well-being, even though he knew she wouldn't agree or do it herself. When they argue about it, we get to see a little of the interplay between them, two people who really care about and need each other, but are perhaps bound by a more formal working relationship and social convention, hinting at a deeper connection that maybe has or hasn't blossomed yet. No pun intended. Cecilia's reluctant attitude toward the detectives added some friction to the initial encounter, showing that you would sometimes have to work to draw information out of characters you meet and find ways to earn their trust. And by showing how the police don't operate with perfect efficiency and authority everywhere, we also created some gaps for Miles to move in when he's working as a private detective later on.
Well, we're here now, and we'll do all we can to help you.
We'll have to see about that.
If you wouldn't mind, Mrs. Hanbrook, I'd like to ask you a few questions.
Very well, Detective.
Okay, I will click through all of these.
Could you?
When I
Have you?
and if you
Have you?
No,
Would
fine. That I
you?
in,
No.
it's Friday.
Good.
I
Have you been in?
yeah, but the
Don't you?
det-
I think that.
all right.
Got a minute, Bill?
For you.
The most kept we ever see Miles's hair ever again.
Oh yeah.
For
I forgot about how much different he looks at the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
You ever?
living. Oh,
Still. When's?
unless it's.
What's your impression?
I like.
It's.
Okay.
Let's get back to it.
All right. Interesting choice of decor in here.
Perhaps it wasn't always used as a storeroom, although I can understand why it would have been converted.
Yeah, it is rather drafty in here.
I knew from the start that I wanted to feature voice acting in the game, so when coming up with the alternate version of the United States that was still the British Commonwealth of Vespuccia, there was an important question to consider. What accents would people have? I considered going exclusively British, since it would have fit the tone of the game, but this presented two issues. One, it would make people think the game was set in England, which some players thought anyway, and it would mean I'd have to hire British actors. The second thing was mainly an issue because I like to work locally with actors in New York City, and I also like to cast people of the same nationality, ethnicity, and races as the characters they're playing. While I'm certain there are British voice actors in New York, this game had 70 speaking roles spread out over 19 actors, and finding a pool of exclusively British ones to cast from was probably not feasible. So I decided to make the majority of Vespuccians speak like Americans. In addition to the convenience of casting, I figured realistically this world's equivalent of an American accent would have developed the same as it did in our world. Vespuccia has been a Commonwealth nation since the 1600s, which would have given the descendants of the early settlers plenty of time to have developed a unique accent, much as in the USA, Canada, Australia, etc. And while I did end up having some characters who speak in British accents played by Americans, I figured I could get away with it in 1 or 2 instances, rather than 70.
Yeah, that's a lot of roles.
Yeah.
When I was designing the Handbrook Flower Shop, I had to consider a few things. Most importantly, that the big confrontation was going to happen on a roof high enough that falling off it would be fatal. This meant the shop needed to have more than one floor. For the upstairs storeroom attic area, this meant it needed some high ceilings and big windows. I searched for some images online, but immediately remembered Tim Burton's adaptation of Sweeney Todd.
Didn't call this out, but it looked like that immediately when I first saw it.
And visually interesting. So I shamelessly stole the design, including the striped wallpaper. So far, only one person noticed, so I think I got away with it. Except now you know. So, don't tell anybody, okay?
Interesting. The window. I wonder.
What are you thinking for?
That it's time for an I'm going to need a...
Jim.
Originally, the sequence where Miles conducts his experiment was a non-interactive cutscene, where he just climbed out the window and unlocked it on his own once you had the plant hook. My
That's
friend
not
and
fun.
fellow game dev Ben Chandler played through this section and noted that it would be far more interesting to require the player to unhook the latch. At first I hesitated, but I put together a quick mock-up and found that it did work, and so it made it into the game. The reaction from several people who tested and played at expos was one of delight, so I'd say it was a good decision. Thanks, Ben. When I drew this scene initially, I tried making the gap in the window noticeable, since proceeding requires the player to look at both the latch and the gap. However, I noticed a lot of people weren't noticing the gap right away. In order to remedy this, I put a small speck of yellow window light in the gap so that the player's eye would be drawn to it quickly. This solved the problem almost immediately.
Ben is an artist at Wadjet Eye, I think.
Yeah, it was looking on Moby Games here. And 12 games at Wadget Eye, 25 games at Valve. Interesting.
Valve has 25 games? How does that work?
I don't know.
But yeah, he's working on Nighthawks, which is a game I'm extremely excited for. And I auditioned for. I did not get the role, but I was I wanted to at least try it because I really want that game to come out, and being part of it would have been cool.
Oh, I guess this is 25 games where Valve also has some sort of credit listed.
Oh.
So I don't know what that. Oh,
maybe
could be like published by or something like that.
Interesting. I don't know what that would be. Nighthawks is a Wadget Eye game coming out that is a modern era noir story focused on like vampires and stuff like that. It's very cool. Full disclaimer: I Kickstarter backed it. Don't care. Very excited for it.
Unmarked.
I'll keep my...
Seems to be...
Why not?
I've seen this type of...
Okay.
I would imagine that keeping a consistent temperature in here...
When do you suppose...
Hard to say.
And according to them, it's going to be one of their more, like... adult games? I don't know what that means, like, but they're going to have some sort of romance of some kind in it.
Okay.
But also it's vampires, so like half the time vampire stuff is sexual innuendo anyway.
Mrs. Hanbrook, were you...
Is that... Are you...
It's a distinct...
Well, I trust you.
I think that's all...
All right.
Hook.
Aha! Mrs. Hanbrook.
Is that...
Yes.
Please.
In both chat and or robotspacer, if I am clicking through too much, you let me know.
Oh, that's fine.
The window lat. Lamplight City. Good. Bill, it's time. Simple. Rather dark out here.
Make a comment after they did finish talking.
Now then, could you please close?
So, Bill's jacket is slightly grayish purple or purplish gray with gray pants, and Miles's jacket is a gray jacket with purplish gray pants.
Well, I'd say this is fairly incontrovertible proof.
Where'd you learn how to...
You taught me, remember?
Nah. Are you sure it was me?
Positive. We were a few...
What else have I taught you how to do while drunk?
That would be telling.
Trevor.
Evening, Cecilia.
Trevor, these are detectives. They say there's been a report.
I only... As we...
Now, Mr. Hastings.
Go on.
What?
Have you not like?
Could you?
I think, but you
How long?
are you? If
Okay.
If you don't mind, detective.
Of course.
Learn anything?
Possibly. I may have an idea.
Ah, but if you've got a plan...
Got a minute?
For you?
Right. I can...
So,
it's... Since...
So...
Exactly. I'm... Besides... I'm...
Okay.
Now it'll be interesting to see what happens.
To bring my deck of cards again.
I can't
At least
wait.
it's quite... Right? I said...
I bet it's going to play out very similar,
Oh, yeah,
but...
sure.
Behind?
What, you mean quitting the force?
What?
You should... Plus...
This is a story about why it's extremely important to have many people playtest your game. There was one detail in this scene that always bothered me: how the burglar goes from being at the window to running away. The main problem is that you're not supposed to see the burglar's face, otherwise the whole story of tracking him down would have an easy resolution. That meant he couldn't come into the room, or else he'd be lit by the lamp, or by the moonlight if I had turned the lamp off. So the way the scene played out originally was that once he opened the window, Miles and Bill stood up, shouted, and the burglar would run up to the roof. The problem here was that everyone had the same reaction. Why didn't they just wait until he came inside? Which is a completely valid point.
Sure.
So I tried adjusting the order of things. I had them stand up first, then the burglar ran away, then they shouted and gave chase, but the problem was still there. The third version was having the burglar run as soon as he opened the window, but that raised the question of what had alerted him. Some of the beta testers had pointed this out and suggested having one of the detectives knock something over, but my main concern was that the player not think they were stupid or clumsy. I was pretty much resigned to having this be an unsolvable problem. I showed the game at an expo called Play NYC, and on the very first morning, the very first player made a suggestion that solved everything. He pointed out that I had set up Bill being allergic to flowers, and that they were hiding behind crates that, when looked at, prompted a comment about Bill's allergies. So instantly the light bulb went off. Bill's sneeze is both a payoff, an uncontrollable occurrence that avoids making them look stupid, and a perfectly elegant solution to this problem that I never would have thought of, but in hindsight seems almost embarrassingly obvious. So the moral of the story is, get as many people to playtest your story and plot beats as you can.
That makes sense.
Thanks, Adam.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no.
Bill? Stop! Police!
Damn it. He's got up the fire escape. We can corner him on the
Oh,
roof.
it's pizza time.
Stay close and keep
Pizza
me covered.
time! I will probably make a French bread pizza on break
Stay
later.
back, officer.
Oh, nice.
Got a knife. Ready your pistol for him.
But you're too close!
I trust you, Miles. Your pistol, now! There's really no need for this, officer. I respect your desire to uphold justice. Mine is more important. If you let me go, I won't come back. And we can all forget this ever happened. Don't listen to this lunatic, Miles. Take your shot before things get worse.
Here is another scene that went through a few iterations. At first, I wanted Bill and the Justice Killer to be having a fistfight at the edge of the roof, with you unable to tell who was who.
Oh.
Which was the main reason Bill loses his
that's
hat when he
interesting.
jumps out the window. At this point, the game forced you to shoot, going so far as turning the cursor into a little crosshair. No matter what, you'd always hit Bill, and he'd fall to his death. This was problematic for several reasons. First of all, the whole can't tell who is who trope is hokey, and Miles blindly shooting at what could be his partner didn't make much sense. Second, with the freedom to click the crosshair anywhere in the background, I figured the temptation to click on the airship in the sky would be too great. I briefly considered adding an Easter egg where shooting it causes the airship to deflate and go flying off comically, but then I came to my senses and set about figuring out how to make this scene more effective. I started off by removing the crosshair and turning it into a dialogue choice. It seemed sensible that Miles would try to talk the burglar down rather than just shoot him, so I gave the player the choice. Admittedly, it's a bit of a false choice since Bill dies either way, but it's the game's only one.
Oh.
Also, certain lines of dialogue change based on whether or not you shoot Bill, so I felt it was something I could get away with. As expected, most players seemed to let the burglar go rather than shoot first, although it was always fun to see who just went for it right away.
Reason with him.
Red-handed. Put down the knife, let my partner go, and give yourself up.
No! I'm not going to jail. Do you know what they do to people in there?
Yes, I do. If you cooperate, I'll see if I can get the judge to ease your sentence.
I appreciate your tactics, Fordham, but this really isn't the time.
Oh, interesting. All right.
Come on, all you've really done is taken some flowers. You're not a killer. Don't make things worse for yourself.
You don't know anything about me. One thing's for sure. I'm not going to jail. So let me go free, or else your partner is going over the side. Fordham, this madman clearly can't be reasoned with. Take your shot, now!
Oh. Huh.
Okay, we'll look the other way just this once. Just let my partner go.
Fordham, are you insane?
Bill, don't!
Oh.
Bill!
Oh, interesting.
That's very interesting.
Oh, God. I am so sorry, my friend.
I wonder how much that changes people's dialogue.
So sorry.
I remember one part fairly early.
Because like they call out you
up.
shooting Bill a few times.
But I don't think it comes up that often.
Yeah, I want to say a few times with you talking with Addie. Or once talking with Addie, and then the douchebag cop, and then Snelling, I think.
Overdid it on the soporific. Why do I feel like I've had this conversation before?
I'm just glad you're in the mood to converse again. Seriously, you took so much of that snake oil last night, I was starting to think you wanted me quiet for good.
Lamplight City is all about relationships, and arguably the most important one is between Miles and Bill. This first scene, which reveals that Miles can hear Bill, and has been doing so non-stop for 3 months,
I wonder if he's going to say whether Bill is real or not.
The tone for the rest of the game, and as such went through several rewrites. Initially it had more of a playful, joking tone, consistent with the banter they shared during the prologue. However, I quickly realized that the severity of the situation wasn't coming through. Miles had to show signs that hearing Bill was actually bothering him. I kept Bill lighthearted to begin with, but changed so he got more harsh when Miles pushed back. I didn't want them to bicker like an old married couple, especially since there was also going to be actual marital strife in Miles' story, but it was important to make their relationship more complex. Overall, Bill helps Miles, but there are also darker moments where he threatens and torments him. Needless to say, making Bill a primary source of conflict while still keeping him likable was quite a challenge.
Oh, okay. Can't click that when there's a choice. I don't remember what we chose before, so go with this one.
That was the idea.
Come now, you don't really mean that.
Believe me, I do.
I know it's not easy, but there's really no need.
Not easy. Bill, I've been hearing your voice since you died. You don't shut up unless I take that accursed medicine. I'd say that qualifies as a bit more than not easy.
Yeah, well, how do you think I feel? You think I enjoy being trapped here, listening to you whine about how hard your life's become? You at least still have yours.
If you're just as miserable, why don't you just go away and leave me in peace?
Believe me, I wish I knew how. But the bottom fact is, you're stuck with me. So you can either keep living this way and ruin your life even more than you already have, or you can do as I've told you and try to figure out a way to let me move on.
I've dealt with you for the past 3 months. I can keep doing it.
Yeah, and with the way you've been going, you'll end up like me sooner rather than later.
So then it's back to your oh-so-clever plan of tracking down the burglar from the flower shop?
Yes, exactly.
I still don't get how that's going to help.
I've told you several times, although to be fair, if you actually listened to me, I'd still be alive. But the point remains, you wouldn't have been in that situation in the first place if not for him. Once the criminal has been caught and is in custody, we'll both get what we want.
A decent night's sleep?
More than that, you'll have that elusive thing you always wanted to give others. Closure.
You do realize the trail's pretty much frozen at this point. Our man has seemingly vanished into the ether.
That's no excuse not to keep trying. I know the cases Upton's been giving you these past few months haven't been the most thrilling, but they've at least kept you active. So just keep at it. Something has to turn up eventually. Unless, of course, you want to wind up in River.
Fine.
I wonder.
Good man. Now, I suggest you, or just maybe, just stop wondering.
Very fun.
Francisco is a pretty nice guy. He's so nice that his niceness comes through in everything he does, including writing characters who sometimes end up a little too nice themselves as a result. Drama is about conflict. One of my frequent notes on early drafts of the script was that everyone was being too damn polite all the time, and that we needed to allow the characters to be nastier to each other when the situation called for it. We needed them to sometimes be selfish, to misunderstand one another, to say mean, hurtful things, even if they apologized and made up later. This was surprisingly hard to do. It turns out we're both pretty nice people, and pushing the dialogue in this direction to heighten conflict was challenging for both of us. The first conversation between Miles and the voice of dead Bill was one place where we definitely needed the gloves to come off. Miles's mental anguish is the driving force of the whole story, so it needed to be clear from the start that having this voice in his head was a deeply disturbing state of affairs and a constant source of tension and anxiety. In the first draft, Miles's attitude came off as little more than mild disgruntlement, so we sharpened the exchange considerably, and probably could have pushed it even further than we did.
When I was initially designing Lamplight City, I knew one of the unique features was the fact that Miles was going to hear Bill from beyond the grave. What I wasn't sure of was how to implement it.
Okay,
One
yeah, build the
idea I
narrator.
had was to have the sound of a heartbeat, yet another Poe reference, or unintelligible whispers when hovering over hotspots, and make Bill's presence be more subtle, acting as more of a hotspot indicator. But after thinking it over, that seemed like wasted potential. I remembered a game I made as part of a monthly competition on the Adventure Game Studio forums way back around 2002, based on the movie Donnie
I
Darko.
played this.
In that game, I had Donnie's
interesting.
imaginary friend Frank the Bunny act as narrator, describing
I
objects
remember
and telling
this.
Donnie what to do. So I decided to do the same for Bill. I figured doing this would allow for an interesting dynamic between him and Miles, especially being able to subvert the usual trope of having game narrators and main characters talk as a comedic way of breaking the fourth wall. While Miles and Bill do have some amusing exchanges, the overall tone isn't played for laughs. Rather, it shows that hearing Bill constantly is taking a very real toll on Miles' mental health. The animation with the honor of having the highest frame count in this game goes to Miles standing up from his chair and putting on his coat with a total of 31 frames. Like all the other animations in the game, it was rotoscoped, meaning I filmed myself performing the action and then traced over it frame by frame. The fact that Miles wears his coat inside his apartment is a little weird, but considering everything he's going through, I think it makes sense that he wouldn't be overly concerned about his dress sense.
All right, hold on, chat. I'm gonna find a link for this.
I'm gonna go grab more pizza.
You go for it. Yep, there it is. Throw it in chat. What kind of pizza do I like? So I firmly believe there's no such thing as bad pizza. I don't like fish, so no anchovies, please. I don't mind a Hawaiian pizza. If I only had, like, if I could only ever have one topping ever again, it would probably be pepperoni. I dig regular. I'm not a huge fan of thin crust, but I won't turn it away. Like if I was just going to order a pizza, it would probably be a regular crust pizza with pepperoni and mushrooms. Sometimes I will get one that is like a barbecue chicken pizza with like bacon and mushrooms and barbecue sauce instead of regular sauce, etc. You can do the same thing without barbecue sauce and use a white sauce if you prefer. But all pizza's good. Sure. I'm not a huge fan of olives, but I won't turn it away. Unless it's way too many olives. I lived for a decent portion of my life in New York. So I have been spoiled with some of the best pizza in the world. Also, Chicago deep dish is not pizza. It is delicious, but it's not pizza. It's just like a pie is not a cake, and a cake is not a pie. Chicago deep dish is a casserole, but it is a delicious casserole.
Yes.
I say that mostly jokingly, but also a little bit not. Anyway. I did post the link to the Donnie Darko game.
Yeah, I'm looking at it.
Well, look who's awake. Ready to rejoin the living?
Very much so.
You were talking in your sleep again.
Did I say anything interesting?
Do you ever?
You have to admit, she's got you there.
How are you feeling?
A touch groggy. I think I took a bit too much of the soporific last night.
That's what I thought. When you went for your after-lunch nap, you'd barely gotten breakfast down. I saved you some bread and cheese if you're hungry.
Thank you, but I haven't got much of an appetite.
You really should regulate your doses more carefully.
Going to reiterate that Addy is MVP of this game.
And an empty stomach aren't much help to your work. By the way, a message arrived via courier for you this morning. I put it on the table.
Wait, Thank you. We don't need it. I'm like, we've heard this dialogue. Okay.
One thing that was very important to me was that the player see Miles as home, and that it should feel like a safe, welcoming place. It also should give insight into Miles and Adelaide as characters by having several items to look at, which expanded on both of their individual backstories as well as their relationship. I drew great inspiration from St. George's Bookshop in Gabriel Knight, which was a place where, no matter what was encountered outside, always felt like home base. Of course, a large part of what makes the Fordham apartment feel so cozy is Mark Bennis's amazing score. Later in the game, when Miles is thrown out, the loss of access to this area is intended to make the player feel empathy, as though an important part of the life they know has also been taken from them. Upton's apartment, while nice in its own way, is a poor substitute for this place.
Oh yeah, Puzzlex. Yeah, I was created in the Bronx. You want to see a very poor approximation of the house that I was created in, you watch my lore video. It's actually pretty similar to where I lived in the Bronx, although in reality there were a lot of closer houses to it. As in, like, right next to it. But yes. Yeah, I miss New York. I miss the food. I miss being able to have public transportation. But Kansas
Somehow
is
I've never been to New York City or had actual New York pizza. I maybe had like New York style.
Yeah, the biggest difference is the crust, right? The biggest difference is that because of the, I think it is literally because of the way that water is filtered and cleaned there. It just does different stuff. Same thing for bagels, makes them very different. With like when people try to do New York style pizza, yes, they make the crust like thin, but then either it is too thin and just becomes like a cracker crust, or tends to be not thin enough and still kind of super doughy. I'm trying to think how I would describe it. So New York crust pizza in New York, you can still taste it like it was a bread rather than a cracker, like on a Pizza Hut thin crust. But it still has structure. Like, it is actually like, even if you're folding it, it still feels like it's solid even though it's super thin. And it's just it's so good. Didn't need that.
I mentioned before that Lamplight City is all about relationships, the second most important being between Miles and Adelaide. I felt it was very important to get right, because the deterioration and potential repair of this relationship
potential repair.
played such an important role in Miles' personal story. In the original
Man,
drafts,
that's going to
Case
suck. We're
started
choosing only
6
wrong
months
choices
after
this
Bill's
time. We're going to
death,
see what happens
at
if we
which
don't
point
prepare it.
Miles had already been going out drinking every night. Whenever Addie asked him what was wrong or mentioned his behavior in dialogue, Miles would brusquely brush it off and she'd back down. In short, Miles was a complete jerk, because complete jerks are easy to write. The real challenge lies in writing a believable strained relationship. Early testers remarked that they didn't understand why Miles and Addie were still together, let alone why they'd fallen in love in the first place. This was a problem. When the game was going to be published by Wadjet, Dave suggested
I didn't know they were
scrapping the
originally going to publish
relationship
this.
and making it so Adelaide was Bill's wife, who Miles could go visit, and who would help him out of loyalty to her deceased husband. I stubbornly refused to make this change. Instead, I shortened the time between the end of the prologue in Case 1 to 3 months, and introduced the idea of the soporific. While Miles was still dealing with his issues via drug use, it seemed more socially acceptable, especially in the 19th century, to be taking medicine with adverse side effects rather than getting wasted every night. The tension in the relationship was eased, so that Adelaide knew something was up, but still hadn't quite reached a breaking point, which became the focus of the climactic confrontation. Also, the dialogue was changed so that Miles wasn't so curt in his deflection whenever Adelaide made mention of his issues. All in all, it was definitely a personal challenge for me to write, but in the end I think the depiction of the relationship turned out okay, and Adelaide ended up being a lot of people's favorite character.
Yes. Strong agreed.
Probably my favorite thing about this game, second only to the door animations, is how it handles Miles and Addie's complex relationship. They have their sweet, tender moments, but underneath that there are issues of addiction, lying, and interracial intolerance. Yet through it all, I've always thought of Addie as one of the strongest characters in the games and as Miles' rock. So musically, I thought she deserved just as strong of a theme. It just so happened that when I wrote the title screen track, I came up with a main theme, if you want to call it, a soaring melody that goes up an interval of a sixth on the French horn. At the time, I hadn't decided whether it would be associated with a specific character, but Addie seemed perfect for it when I really realized who Addie was and where I could go with that melody. A little trick that composers sometimes do when we have to write a title track before finishing an entire score is we'll plant little themes and motifs into it, even if we're not sure how we'll use them. This keeps the door open to all sorts of possibilities and helps ensure that the score sounds consistent once it's all done. In the case of Addie's theme, the totally different harmony, instrumentation, and mood makes the melody from the title screen feel fresh and new, yet also familiar.
Right. All right.
Upton says she's got a big case for me.
Does she go into any more detail than that?
No, but then you know Upton, always on a need-to-know basis. Especially since she's been giving me these cases under the...
To be fair...
True.
I think...
Poor Connie. With you quitting and me dying, she must be bored stiff at work.
Anyway, I'm supposed to meet her at the ruined coffee house. That can't be right.
It's not like Constance to make mistakes. She must
Bill
have
said he
gotten
quit.
in somehow.
Guess I'll head over there and see what she's got then.
I don't think that we quit last time.
Huh.
It's been building.
What happened specifically?
I think last time we were fired.
Your book collection.
Okay.
Or it was like with you getting let go.
Right.
Time for me to get...
Don't work.
Makes sense.
Yeah. We did shoot our partner last.
Yeah.
The Rouen Coffee House. Worst job. Just make sure.
While conducting research for Lamplight City, I learned that unlike the more laid-back coffee shops or cafes we know today, the coffee houses of 17th and 18th century London were important social meeting places where patrons could engage in debates, political discussions, or do business. Some coffee houses had a reputation for being dirty, gloomy, and smelly. Since places like that are much more interesting to draw, I decided Rouen would be of that type. One interesting aspect of coffee houses was that they welcomed patrons from all social classes and races, provided they were men. Women were allowed to work as servers, but were banned as patrons until the second half of the 19th century. Coffee houses had more or less fallen out of fashion and disappeared from London by the 19th century, so I figured it would make sense for their previous century form to be brought over to the New World.
Yeah, this definitely reminded me of the bar in Gabriel Knight 1 also puzzle.
Up to no good.
Hello, Fordham. It's good to see you.
How did you get them to let you in here?
It's rather simple, really. The owner and I have an understanding. He pretends women are allowed in coffee houses, and I don't report his unsavory business practices to Chief Snelling.
Sounds like a good deal. What sort of unsavory business practices are we talking about?
Oh, we haven't got time to get into that now. But take some advice. Don't order anything that isn't water.
Okay.
Managed to sneak another case past Snelling, eh?
Yes, and if he finds out I did, it won't be pretty. This is a big one. We're not in Lost Cat territory anymore.
So stop teasing me and tell me what it is already.
Do you know Madame Laura Dupre?
Okay.
Laura?
That's
right. I can...
But...
She... So...
You...
Has Madame Dupre recovered from her ordeal?
I'm afraid not.
That one.
If you'd like to question Mr. Or you could take a look...
And the Dupre...
That's at Emmeline and Comtesse. It's...
Thanks for the...
So...
Was there...
So...
How far do we want to go into wrong choices only? Because I'm pretty sure I could just tell her it's an unsolvable case right now.
Yes.
Well...
Would you rather just make a wrong accusation each time?
I do want to hear the art commentary on this.
Yeah, no, yeah,
scene.
absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
But other than that, I'm fine with fucking it up immediately.
Okay. Well, my thought was... Okay, we at least have to go talk to people. Good.
Well, I'm not entirely sure how this is... But...
My question is... Do we decide to make the wrong accusation every time, or do we decide to make them not solved every time? So I'm sure if we do not solved, we could get through this whole game today.
I think we should do a mixture. Like, we should do unsolved at least once, just to see how that plays out in one of them. But I think it'd be interesting to see how, like, making the wrong accusation plays out as well.
Okay.
Right.
So the one that I don't think we had an alternate accusation for was... the kidnapping? So I think we make that one unsolved.
Makes sense.
Fans of Gabriel Knight's Sins of the Fathers might notice a striking similarity between the interior of the Rouen Coffee House and the Napoleon House. This was done intentionally for a couple of reasons.
Because it's a good scene.
I had tried coming up with a suitable composition for this scene, and was struggling to find something that was both functional and interesting to look at. Referencing Napoleon House took care of that, since it had a composition I already knew worked. The other reason was, as Rouen is located in Gascon, the Bretagne most reminiscent of New Orleans' French Quarter, I thought having elements of Napoleon House would serve as a visual shorthand for people familiar
How
with
did Elden Ring
Gabriel
go?
Knight. I mainly lifted the positions of the door, window, and bar, while shifting the tables ever so slightly. Normally I wouldn't go for such a blatant reference to an existing background from another game, but I allowed myself this one exception. The painting on the far left is based on one located inside a local cafe, where I did a lot of work on a Golden Wake, Shardlight, and this game in its very early days.
That's rad.
The character of Connie Upton, perhaps my favorite in the whole game, was originally conceived as a man named Edward Upton. One of the first things I do when I start working on a game is take a look at the gender balance of the cast. Basically, I want to see that at least half of the characters are women, especially major characters with arcs and narrative agency. And with the lineup of Miles, his partner Bill, and his police force pal Edward, that left Addie as the only major character who wasn't male. So at a pretty early stage, I pitched changing Edward Upton into Constance Upton. At that point, there was no art or dialogue yet, just a description of the character's background and their role in the story. Other than a new name, I was adamant that the other details about the character should change as little as possible. She remained an overweight, desk-bound officer with marital troubles, a brave and loyal friend with an impish sense of humor and an easy teasing rapport with her old buddy Miles, who habitually greets her as up to no good. I love the friendship we landed on between these two colleagues, and I can't help but think that the dynamic would have been different if Connie had originally been written as a woman. She still has her clandestine meetings with Miles in a coffee house, although we had already determined that these establishments were typically off-limits to women. So we added a line about how Connie used her official position to strong-arm the coffee house owner into turning a blind eye. This establishes a background level of gender discrimination in the world, and also introduces Connie as an assertive, rule-bending risk-taker, which she would have to be in order to keep helping Miles as she does. We did tweak Connie's backstory a bit. Originally, Edward Upton was to have suspected his wife of cheating, with the idea that the player could help uncover the truth in the course of the story. After the gender swap, we changed this to establish that Miles's friendship with Connie started back when he helped her get proof of her abusive husband's infidelity, which she needed to legally secure a divorce. Again, an example of how this society's lopsided laws
same idea,
didn't
but it
always
already
provide
happened, basically.
equal justice. But it also showed how someone resourceful and determined like Connie might need to navigate them to survive.
Okay, so Culinary asking, how are the bad decisions going? Well, turns out our other decision that we made the first time interacting with Bill's murderer may have been the bad decision. Because already it seems like we did not shoot him, and we were not fired. So we're a little bit better off there. But we're going to be making some bad decisions.
And then we haven't had any major choices to make yet.
Yeah. Secret Crush saying, another game's immaculate artistic vision spoiled by the woke mind virus. No. It's obviously marked with sarcasm. Yeah, I actually think it's a very smart change. I really like Connie's character throughout the game, and I think the idea, reinforcing the idea of how she's able to do this, how she's able to get those cases out of the police case, changing it so her backstory was that she worked with Miles to, like, get out of a bad marriage, makes that perfectly fit. Culinary. Find it very funny that shooting Bill lets you get the perfect run trophy. No, Bill's definitely in our heads still.
I mean, it was specifically for solving the cases perfectly, not necessarily for making every perfect choice.
Yeah, there's no way that us pissing off the victim's mom here was the right choice.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to do differently.
Yeah.
I'll be back in just a minute.
Yep.
Compton Street. When's the last time?
Please, let's not add eating to the list of...
We'll come back here. This is not where I want to go.
Fordham? Is that you? You look like something a cat spat up.
Hello, Giles. It's lovely to see you too. I'm looking. What?
No, such a.
Okay. We'll wait for robotspacer to return. So chat, what I think we'll try to do is unlock as many of the rooms that we can, because the commentary is linked to those rooms, and then still make a wrong choice. I'll mention this again once he's back, but Kia liked our playthrough so much that as soon as we, like the day before our final stream last week, she bought it on the Switch and started playing through it on her own. It's a good game. Then she finished it and is like, I want more games like this. I agree. I wonder if she can get the Gabriel Knight remake on Switch. Is that on Switch? Let's look. Welcome back. I don't know if you heard me mention it, but right before our stream last week, Kia bought this on Switch and started playing through the whole thing on her own. And then she finished it and was like, I want more games like this to play. I'm like, yeah, I'm with you. Okay. So,
in keeping with the theme of the period, I decided to use the alternate older spelling of jail. Both G-A-O-L and J-A-I-L come from French. Northern French used the word gaol, and Parisian French used jail. British law adopted the G spelling, and it was used from 1760 to 1830. Since New Britannia is still in the Commonwealth, it stands to reason they would still use the English spelling. It confused some of the voice actors, but thankfully not as much as Chumley.
Chumley.
As a side note, Giles the Jailkeeper, see what I did there, is visually based on an infamous historical jailkeeper named Daniel Lambert. If you're not familiar with him, I suggest you look him up.
He's just gonna do a little Google over here. Sweet Lord. I'm just gonna post this in chat for you guys, folks.
Oh, interesting.
I don't know what I expected.
And animal breeder.
I definitely did not expect what I saw once I searched for his name. But okay. Let's talk to Albert.
Mr. Martin, who are? No, I'm looking. Oh, would you mind?
Interesting choice of phrase for someone.
What can you?
I also mentioned what I think I'm going to try to do is unlock every scene before we make the wrong choice in the case, because that way we can see the commentary for those scenes.
I am curious if we're going for listening to all the commentary, if we will be able to do that within one evening. But I'm all for
not.
attempting to, and seeing how it is going as we go through it all.
Yep.
These jail cell designs are interesting.
Yeah, the little like crosshatch.
Yeah, and like the lock area.
That's weird. I guess that's just because you need to have like a mechanism in there to lock and unlock, right? But
right.
Honestly,
Not
that's probably
interesting
more
enough to
secure
talk
than
about, I guess.
just the straight bars that they used to have back in the day.
Yeah.
All right. Go talk to his mom.
I decided early on that one way I wanted to give New Britannia the feeling of being a real city was to have some way of distinguishing each borough. In real cities, divisions like boroughs or neighborhoods are common, but the lines aren't always clear. In New York, for example, Manhattan is pretty different from the other boroughs since it's mostly skyscrapers. However, the overall city architecture is fairly consistent, so there are parts that resemble Brooklyn or Queens.
Yep.
The same goes for the other boroughs, which have their unique areas for sure, but overall look pretty similar. Since there weren't too many outside scenes to show off possible unique architecture, I had to come up with some other way to
Queens as
identify
actual
each borough.
houses.
So I decided to identify them by color.
With, like, yards.
Lyon, the rich borough, got purple, the color
Small
of royalty
yards.
and wealth. Worcester, the working class area, got blue for strength and calm. Gascon, the rowdy port borough, got turquoise to represent sea green and the more spiritual nature of the residents. Finally, Chumley, the rougher part of town, got red to symbolize the harshness of life and the blood in the streets from the slaughterhouses. So, for each background, I made sure to incorporate as much of each borough color as possible, especially the interiors. You'll notice on the map screen that the color field in the background of each icon corresponds to the borough it's located in. This scene in particular is a Worcester exterior, and although it's mostly reds and oranges, I made sure to include blue in the door frames, one of the buildings, and Sabine's door. You'll notice the interior of her apartment is mainly blue.
That's rad. I did not know that about the icons. We'll look at that as soon as we get back out to the map.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have no time for visitors today.
You're Albert Martin's mother, aren't you?
Who are you?
Miles Fordham. I spoke with Albert, and he told me to give you a message. He said to tell you that St. Roch's dog is barking.
Oh, I see. That's good. That's very good. You better come in, Mr. Fordham. Standing on the street just won't do. Welcome to my home, Mr. Fordham. I am Sabine Martin. I hope you understand that Albert has nothing to do with this awful business. Would you care?
Well...
No, thank you, ma'am.
I'm not entirely familiar with specifics of voodoo outside of the research I've done, but having grown up in Miami in a predominantly Cuban culture, I was familiar with Santeria, which is more or less the Afro-Cuban version. Like voodoo, Santeria adopts elements of Catholicism, mainly its saints, most of whom have a direct counterpart in voodoo. For example, the man at a crossroads associated with dogs is Saint Lazarus in Santeria and Papa Legba in voodoo. His veve appears in the rug on the floor. Having a bit of this knowledge made it easier to figure out how to decorate the outside, public face of the Martin apartment. As for the section behind the curtain, I researched and looked up images of traditional ceremonial objects in voodoo.
The voodoo elements in the first case were a fun area to explore, and a bit of a nod to the Gabriel Knight series. I had previously read The Serpent and the Rainbow and done some other research on voodoo for an unfinished student project I had worked on that was about voodoo zombies, so I had all that material knocking around in my head and wanted to use it somewhere. I was also keen to present the beliefs and traditions in a better light than most popular culture does, which is why the voodoo lead is a red herring in this case, and why you're making a big mistake if you disrespect Albert's mother or assume that they're tied up in black magic rituals. Zombie potions and voodoo dolls are dramatic fodder for horror movies, but that's not what the actual culture and religious practice is about. I also like the idea of keeping the voodoo stuff mostly private and out of sight. You don't get to quiz Sabine about all the details of her religious beliefs, and you don't get invited behind the curtain to witness some performative spectacle. It's not relevant to the case, and you don't get all the answers that you're after just to satisfy your curiosity. There's a sense that the whole world doesn't exist just for the player, and this little part of it is simply not for you.
That's great.
The music for Sabine Martin's apartment was one of the most challenging pieces to write because it dealt with a controversial topic, voodoo. While voodoo tends to have evil connotations in pop culture, think black magic, Lamplight City treats it with a positive light. It's a misunderstood religion that people use to wrongfully accuse Albert Martin for the crimes against Madame Dupre. For the game to pull off this fresh interpretation of voodoo, I knew the music had to avoid reducing it to an all too common stereotype. I started by first researching what voodoo music actually sounds like. Turns out it's percussion heavy and features some pretty complex rhythms. And no, nothing about it actually sounds evil. So to capture a neutral tone and also pay homage to voodoo's musical roots, I used a djembe, an African drum similar in sound to the traditional instruments, and combined it with open harmonies and the pure sound of a bowed vibraphone and bowed zither. By choosing sounds that don't reinforce negative stereotypes, I wanted to give players the chance to come to their own conclusions about whether voodoo is actually to blame in this case.
Okay.
I've got a few questions.
So the thing we screwed up,
we asked her for tea. We open up the curtain.
And then she goes to get the tea, and then we have an opportunity to snoop around.
Yep.
And we took that opportunity.
And then we asked her about it.
Right.
I'm going to ask for the tea and then just not look behind it.
After all.
Yeah.
You'll have to.
Around that path, it's the Virgin Mary.
Just leave while she's getting tea. Willow being weird and just going underneath the desk on one side and then crawling out back to the other side.
Normal dog stuff. Oh no.
No, that's fine. I'm just not going to ask her about it. I think I had to do that for her to come back.
Yeah, I was wondering.
I've got.
Okay.
Thank you for.
We're not going to ask about that. Bye-bye.
Aren't you going to have your tea, Mr. Fordham?
Oh yeah. So like these are all green. It's purple and it's a little bit blue.
Okay. Yeah.
That's cool.
Did not notice that at all. So wait, which icon was hers? Is it still there?
Nope.
Okay. So regardless of our actions, we can't go back there.
One of the key mechanics of detective games, and of Lamplight City in particular, is searching crime scenes for clues and interrogating suspects and witnesses, usually in their homes or places of work. However, an easy pitfall when coming up with these locations is to make them normal homes or offices. And let's be honest, there are only so many ways you can draw a home or office and make it look interesting. So I challenged myself to come up with unique locations that were not only visually interesting, but also showed off the world. Considering so much time and effort went into the world building, it seemed like a waste not to take advantage and show it off. I definitely thought about this when designing Case 5, which takes you through every borough of the city. In this case, Juliet Montgomery, a student of botany and potential suspect, could have just been sitting at home or in her rented room, but I decided it would be much cooler to see her working at a large greenhouse.
And you were right.
With Victorian-era music, a few things that come to mind are a regal atmosphere, harpsichord, and horns. University of New Britannia felt like the perfect place to bring out some of that Victorian flair, so I wrote for a French horn quartet structured as a fugue in the second half of the piece. This form, the fugue, is most associated with the Baroque era, specifically the composer J.S. Bach, and it is somewhat cerebral in nature given that the same melody must be stated and imitated across each of the individual instruments. What better way to represent a university than by over-intellectualizing everything?
Pardon the Miles, have you got...
Yeah.
What?
I felt... It's... We've...
What can...
Wait, we could accuse her, couldn't we?
Yeah, I was trying to remember who all we had as options.
These
What my note says has plant secrets.
Yep.
And it is double underlined.
Okay.
You are aware.
Yeah,
They're vast.
Madame Dupre was based on a real figure from New Orleans' history named Delphine.
I was wondering about
Lalaurie.
this.
Fans of the TV series American Horror Story will remember she was a prominent character in the 3rd season, played by Kathy Bates. Madame
It's a
Lalaurie
good character person to play her as, too.
Tortured and killed several of her slaves, keeping them bound and chained in their quarters. In 1834, a fire broke out at her mansion, which led to the discovery of these slaves. Like Madame Lalaurie, Madame Dupre has been married 3 times, has children, though Lalaurie had many more than Madame Dupre, and has a hidden sadistic nature. Madame Lalaurie, however, managed to escape justice and lived out the rest of her days in France. I thought it would be satisfying to provide the option to hold Madame Dupre accountable for her misdeeds.
Kathy Bates is an actress who's been in a ton of films. I believe she was Nurse Cratchit in the One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. She was also in that Stephen King story that turned into a movie. It was about the author that gets gets in a car accident and gets stuck at a lady's home, and she breaks his legs to keep him there. She's also the voice of Jessica Rabbit. So that
really?
Yeah. And a bunch of other stuff. She's a very, very good actress. It was not it was not Kathy Bates. Sorry. But yeah, she was in a lot of other. She's been in a lot of stuff in Cuckoo's Nest. But it was Kathy Bates. What is the name of that movie? Is it not Insomnia? That's a different Stephen King book.
Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on it. Also, it's like, can I think of it?
Misery.
Originally, the circumstances of Madame Dupre's attack were going to be much more horrific. Not only would she have been buried alive, the perpetrator would have cut out her tongue and broken her hands as insurance to prevent her from giving a verbal or written identification. This was in the game for a while, until players pointed out that the brutal nature of the attack made it hard to sympathize with Guy Dumas. So I took care of the communication problem by making Madame Dupre be in a state of shock. While burying someone alive is still a horrible thing to do, it could at least be overlooked when deciding to let Guy go free. In addition to removing the bandages from Madame Dupre's hands on her sprite, I also took the opportunity to move her from the bench next to Dr. Fellows to her own steampunky wheelchair.
No, on Secret Crush, she wasn't a nurse in Misery. She was just the antagonist? Like, I don't even know if you want to call her... She was the foil in Misery. Actually, no, wait. She was totally a nurse in Misery, wasn't she? She was former nurse. Or I
honestly don't think I've ever seen that.
I read the book again recently. Now I'm looking this up.
Oh, Kathleen Turner was Jessica Rabbit.
See, I'm getting all this stuff messed up. Thank you, on Secret Crush. But I am right. She is a former nurse in Misery.
Kathleen Turner, I can definitely see.
Yeah, Kathleen Turner's been in a bunch of stuff.
Yeah. Puzzle says Annie Wilkes was a former nurse.
Yes. Right. She was in Romancing the Stone, right?
Kathleen Turner?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was also in that one Nick Cage movie, which I can never remember the name of. Something got married?
I know what you're talking about, but I can't.
I'm Googling it now.
Title.
Peggy Sue got married.
Okay.
I mixed up two actors/actresses. Apologies. Thank you, on Secret Crush.
The Dupre Manor was a lot of fun to plan out and draw. At 10 screens total, including 3 close-ups, it's the largest single location in the entire game. I made sure every room had a purpose, either containing a clue to a lead or a character to question. Since the manor is located in Gascon, I looked up architecture and interiors from mansions in New Orleans. The outside garden, with its brick floors, fountain, and manicured hedges, is directly inspired by the Beauregard Keyes house. The interior is a mix of different photo references, but the general feeling I wanted to capture was of a creaky old Victorian mansion from the southern United States. I didn't quite make it dark and gothic. Maybe there can be some place like that in the sequel.
So maybe it's just on my side, but every once in a while his voice, like, to me, sounds like it's robotically distorting. Is anyone else hearing that?
I have not noticed it.
Okay. Unsecret Crush says, let's do a point redeem for Witch Kathy quiz. No. No.
Oh, hello. Are you the new servant? No. Are you? Yeah, but yeah, if the good...
Now is as good a time as any to talk about and praise the voice cast of Lamplight City. I mentioned in another note that the game has 70 speaking roles, since each case has multiple leads with characters you might only meet
right
on
there,
certain
multiple
paths
leads
of
sounded weird
investigation.
for me.
I knew from the get-go that casting this game wasn't going to be easy, and that most actors were going to have multiple roles. Thankfully, I worked with the amazing Shelley Shenoy, who both cast the game and played 5 roles. I was also incredibly lucky casting the 4 leads. I went into the casting with first choices for 3 of the 4, and got them all. The one outlier was Bill, as I had no idea what he should sound like, but once I heard Al Pagano's audition, I knew. In the end, we had 19 actors playing all the major roles, with composer Mark Bennis, audio engineer Ronnie Mraz, and myself providing additional voices for bit parts. You'll hear me as the parrot in this scene, for example. I won't spend time naming each person individually because we'd be here for ages, but I will say that it was a pleasure working with everyone, and I was happy with the performances I got. I look forward to working with many of the actors again in my next game, Rosewater.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have... What... Oh, no. What? That's... Thanks.
If it has to...
There's no limit to the amount of art study you can do, and one incredibly valuable resource I found was a book by illustrator James Gurney called Color and Light, which, unsurprisingly, details techniques and methods of using color and light in paintings. I still consult it often when planning out scenes, but this one in particular was influenced by a section about window light on tiles.
Early drafts of the script made a bigger deal of the status of slavery and former slaves in the world of New Bretagne, which for various reasons we dialed back in revisions. We established in the world building that the emancipation of slaves had happened quite recently in the history of this country. In fact, it happened much earlier than in the real world. No revolution, and no civil war either. The idea was that the abolitionist movement didn't gain political traction until automated steam tech became available as a substitute source of labor. In Case 1, as originally written, the cruelly abusive Madame Dupré was notable among her peers for offering paid employment to her former slaves, which was regarded as an especially compassionate and merciful act. But we got feedback from testers saying that the heavy themes of slavery and racism were distracting and disturbing, and not relevant enough to the narrative to justify including. So we listened and changed the focus of the case to remove references to slavery. Instead of the domestic servants being former slaves, the unusual thing about the Grande Dame's household was her decision to keep employing people when others were replacing them with steam tech machines. This sidestepped an unnecessarily confronting topic and brought the themes of the case more in line with those of the larger game, like class struggle, workers displaced by automation, and anxieties about mechanization and social upheaval in a rising etheric revolution.
Hold on, I need one thing. Okay.
Pardon me, miss.
What?
I'm Miles Fordham.
Oh, I'm so...
Amelie, please.
What?
Juliet told me about you.
Miss Juliet?
Yeah, look.
All right.
I wonder if I could have chosen something else and shut that down. Wait. Oh, well. It's fine.
You may have noticed that there are a lot of paintings decorating the walls of backgrounds in this game. Generally speaking, the houses of the more wealthy clients you visit would have been decorated with portraits. I knew I was probably going to have to draw several of them, so I decided to make it fun by reaching out to several friends and asking them to lend their likenesses to the cause. My goal was to paint them in period-appropriate poses. I have to apologize to Frederick Olsen, who, despite providing a wonderful photo reference that made a great 19th century portrait, ended up as just a face from the nose up at the bottom of the screen there.
Doing that's that one.
Nice. This is always my...
Nothing inside.
Maybe you should...
No.
You're not... Goodness.
One.
Doc... Is it a G... The science... It looks... I hope remembering...
Looks like it's...
Okay.
When Francisco told me that he wanted to use the melody EGFD as a code for Madame Dupre's hidden compartment, the one accessed by the harpsichord, I instantly thought of all the potential that had for the music.
Can we get that right
Since
now?
Madame Dupre is already the centerpiece of the story in Case 1, naturally it made sense to make her melodic code the heart of all of Case 1's music. The piece here is the most obvious example, with entire chords moving in parallel motion according to the contours of this melody. It also appears in the tracks University of New Britannia, Celine, and Saint Roch's Dog is Barking. In the case of the latter, which is the theme for Sabine Martin's apartment, I slightly alter the melody to E, G, F, D flat as a red herring since her son Albert Martin is ultimately not responsible for poisoning Madame Dupre. Case 1 felt so unique since most games don't really use music as a plot device, but I think doing so had the unintended effect of focusing my score and ultimately making it fit Lamplight City better. Many developers are now designing their games with music in mind from the very beginning, and there's a lot of unexplored potential here.
So solving this puzzle early came up in that talk I shared a while back about designing adventure games. And I can't remember how he decided to handle this if you do solve it without actually figuring it out.
Nice melody. I think you should call it the Cheater's Suite.
When I was a kid, I played a Nintendo game called Star Tropics.
Yeah, Star Tropics.
It remains one of my favorites, especially because it made me experience one of my earliest aha moments. Towards the middle of the game, there's a puzzle in which you have to figure out how to pass a blockade in a room with a large pipe organ. A hint is given when you feed a parrot a worm. Do me so far, do me. I still remember the feeling of excitement when I woke up one morning and it just popped into my brain that the parrot's seemingly nonsensical phrase corresponded to the notes on the organ. Do, mi, so, fa, do, mi. So when coming up with puzzles for this first case, I lifted the concept in hopes of giving players that same aha moment. The trick was coming up with a phrase using the syllables of the piano notes that made some sense. I added sofas in both this room and the master bedroom to provide enough of a red herring so the solution might not be completely obvious at first. This seemed to be most players' favorite puzzle, and one of the only real puzzles of the game, but more on that later.
Nope. I already forgot what it was. B.
So did I. I'm trying to remember if he talked about his reasoning for not letting the player just, accidentally figure this out without having found all the clues.
Doesn't even give it to you again. Okay.
I guess ultimately, in order to accuse her, you need probably more evidence.
Locked.
I've never seen so many.
So he would have had to create multiple.
Let's have a look.
Endings for accusing her in particular.
Locked. Locked.
Oh, right. Was that key?
There doesn't.
Yeah, I think there was a key in there.
They're all.
Not to mention.
Nope, wrong button. Not what I meant to do, but that's fine.
Oops.
That gets us the. That's the key to her apartment. That's what that is.
Right.
Doctor. Did you?
What? There?
Those are all
So
the
who are we
questions.
going to accuse in this one?
Her daughter? Or we could accuse
That's what I'm
Arthur.
thinking.
What a beautiful pet.
Arthur is the guy.
Who's a pretty bird?
In jail.
That's Albert, right?
Oh yeah, you're right. Yep.
Okay.
Pieces. Who's a
I think accusing Juliet sounds more interesting to me.
Yeah. I agree.
So do we have enough to do that yet? Like, what do we need in order to do that?
We probably have to see the notes about the poison.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
That's cool. That's cool. That's. Those are the most.
Yeah,
it's a good thing. They appear to be science.
That makes.
They appear.
Well, now.
Just.
The concept of ethericity, the mysterious energy from the ether with mystical properties, was something that was introduced later in development. While not integral to the main plot, it became something unique to the world, and so I felt it was important to introduce it fairly early. Having it as one of the potential leads in the first case, as well as allowing the player to mess around with Juliet's machine, served as a good way to present it. While the concept is mentioned in dialogue throughout the game and is demonstrated at the Lamplight Depot in Case 5, it remains a background element. Maybe if I had come up with it earlier in the development cycle, it would have had a more prominent role, but as it is, I think it lays some good groundwork for exploration in future games set in Vespuccia.
Just a bunch.
Interesting.
Okay. So can we accuse her now?
So I assume when we accuse the wrong person, we'll still get like a similar kind of like
Can we talk?
explanation of us from us explaining, you know, how everything fits together.
Yep.
With the little drawings that are appropriate
so.
to the story we're telling.
Hello again, Miss.
Oh, you know what? I bet you we can't make accusations until Bill says, you know what? These things point to this person. Because he does that for every person that we could possibly do it.
Right, yeah.
Miss. Your brother told me about. Now please drop the app.
Fine.
But
Those.
what can?
She's.
Could I ask?
It's
Albert.
the woman when she. Somebody. Intrigued.
That's all.
Oh, right. We won't find out about the rift until we can meet up with her father, who's in his hunting swamp. We're going to be doing a lot of clicking around, folks. If any of it becomes annoying, this goes for you as well, robotspacer. Let me know.
Sure.
As a
I noticed the graveyard is on the map. We haven't been there
Yeah,
yet,
I can't remember if we
Might be worth doing.
have to go there.
I feel like actually getting in there happened very late in the case.
Yeah, because we had to go talk to
that's
Addie.
probably not necessary, but going here the first time might be important.
I always envisioned New Britannia as a mix of 19th century New York, London, and New Orleans, mixing and matching architectural styles and the feel of certain neighborhoods. In my mind, and in the included map in the bonus content, New Britannia was located in roughly the same spot as New York City. Then, in July of 2018, I took a road trip to Savannah, Georgia. Much like New Orleans, it's a southern city next to a river with a historic district featuring several Victorian-style houses and squares. I immediately fell in love. The one distinct feature of Savannah was the Spanish moss, which is an epiphyte, or air plant, that hangs from branches and sways in the wind. Savannah also has cemeteries with large above-ground crypts. Seeing the Spanish moss blowing in the breeze in the cemetery was both a peaceful and eerie visual, which I knew I had to put in the game. So I decided to add the foreground moss to this background. Animating it proved to be tricky and took a few tries. I finally had to do it by hand in order to get it to look as realistic as possible. However, including it had an unintended consequence. You see, Spanish moss only grows from northern Florida to northern Virginia, so in order to be accurate, New Britannia had to move further south. I ended up placing it somewhere in what would be northern Virginia.
Okay, interesting.
As Case 1 took place during the mid to late afternoon, and this scene was on a hill overlooking the river in Chumley, I thought it would look nice to include the sun, hanging low in the sky, ready to set. I painted the background, and was pleased by the result. Then I took a look at the map of New Britannia, and realized that the cemetery was located on the southern tip. This meant that whatever that landmass on the river was couldn't possibly be Chumley, and worse still, that the camera in the scene was facing south. Now, it's fairly common knowledge that the sun sets in the west, so you can see why this would be a problem. As a result, I had to redraw the map screen and move St. Denis Cemetery northwest so it would make sense to be facing west towards Chumley. Part of me wonders if anyone would have even noticed had I left it as it was, but my inner perfectionist wasn't willing to take the chance.
Oh, yes, I know that way too much. Like, no one will ever see this, but I will.
Yeah.
I don't know him.
Good day. Would you mind letting...
Afraid I can't... This...
I think...
Nice. You're... What?
Well...
Okay. Go talk to Upton about him.
Can we...
Go.
Oh.
Oh.
Madame, I have a... That's enough.
Okay.
I think we need to get into the cemetery to find medicine to wake him up.
If only.
That statue.
The very... You're all...
Right.
Addie?
Yeah.
Do you... I've still got that song.
Thank you.
Certainly.
They were very good.
It's probably the most fun I've had in months.
They've invited us.
Oh, we talk about distracting the officer already.
I was wondering if you...
Excuse me.
Time to punch out a
I
racist.
seem to have gotten off.
My suggestion...
Yes, perhaps.
Stop right there.
I beg.
Don't think I can... You're trying to lure me away from here and into some alley where your gang of Sambos is gonna rob me blind. Exactly how many of them have you got lying in wait for poor unsuspecting fools you bring them?
Just one.
And he doesn't appreciate you talking to his wife.
Miles, was that really necessary?
Yes.
I'm sorry, Addie. You know how I get with people whose minds are full of that rubbish.
Let's just get him out of sight before this land.
In early versions, the player would be offered a few options to respond, either to defend Addie or to let it pass unchallenged, with consequences for the relationship. If you failed to speak up, Addie would feel betrayed and later reproach you for your silence. When we sought out consultation with friends who were actually in mixed couples, they pointed out that it would be realistic for the more privileged person to be righteously indignant on their partner's behalf, while the more marginalized person would tend to diffuse or downplay the situation. We eventually ended up discarding the points model for the relationship with Addie, because we didn't want players to be able to avoid the coming crisis by always picking the wise and prudent thing for Miles to say. It's an important part of Miles's character that he's not always wise and prudent. So in the final version of this scene, while you still get to express yourself by choosing which indignant line to say, Miles will always speak up and say something. And when he tries to commiserate with Addie by complaining that she shouldn't have to hear things like that, she's the one who shrugs it off. She's heard worse. If she stopped putting up with the casually racist ladies whose hair she styles, she says, she wouldn't have any clients at all. Our discussions with friends on the topic made us more confident in our decision to remove player agency from this particular scene in the cemetery. I'm not saying that we necessarily condone punching bigots, but sometimes to stay in character, there's really no alternative.
It is always morally correct to punch a Nazi.
Assaulting a policeman to be on today's activity list.
It'll be fine. When you're on the force as long as I was, you can pretty much get away with murder.
Well, it's been fun, but I need to take
We actually know that's not true, Miles.
Appointment with Mrs. Lefebvre. I'll see you at home later.
Oop, wrong button. There we go.
What a dramatic... Hang on. Surprise.
Okay.
By now you've probably gathered that I'm a sucker for placing foreground objects in the scenes I draw. I think it gives them a nice sense of depth, and can amplify the sense of coziness or claustrophobia in smaller spaces like this one. Despite the Chesterton tomb being one of the larger and more opulent ones in the cemetery, it wouldn't be realistic for it to occupy the entirety of the screen, and keeping the empty space around it in black would have been boring. So I decided to employ the tried and true method of having a missing brick through which the scene camera would be peering through. I think it does a lot for the atmosphere of the scene. There's a fun little art trick which I employed quite a bit in this game, which is using composition triangles to guide the eye. One way to do this is to have 3 distinct points which stand out from the rest of the background, creating the triangle. In this background specifically, the predominant colors are orange and blue, a complementary palette which I find incredibly appealing. The angel in the center of the background is already pretty eye-catching, but in order to guarantee that players didn't think it was just decoration, I made it the center of a triangle. You'll notice the only uses of red in the background, the red eggs in the nest at the top left, the flower design in the floor at the bottom, and the actual flowers in the vase to the right, form a triangle enclosing the statue. Originally the nest was a section of exposed brick, but that was a bit too distracting. So now that you know about this trick, see if you can find all the other instances throughout the game in which I used it.
Knowing absolutely nothing about art theory, that's pretty rad.
That's interesting. To me, like, the other things going on here seem much more important in drawing your eye to the statue. Like, especially that light coming in from above.
Sure.
And just the way the statue is lit.
I'm not going to look over here because we don't want to find the paper. We can go wake up.
I have some... Oh. You'll know... I see you. Look. I'm willing... Thought
I should have turned him in. That would have been a wrong choice, but that's fine.
What can you tell me? Despite impressed, I only wish Mother.
Oh, but
what? Machi? No. How do you...
Yes.
What? Do you know? Wait. How is the I do? That's who I.
Okay. So now we should be able to go see Dad, who will tell us about her getting pulled from college. Oh. We can't see Dad yet. Did I miss something?
I was very curious if this would happen, or it would be kind of tricky to remember everything we need to do, especially with all the dialogue skipping.
He's
scared.
Interesting.
Do you have any?
If he's
what kind?
No.
Puzzle asks, I'm curious if you can do all the right steps and then accuse the wrong person, since I don't remember it locking you in with the truth. From what I recall of our first playthrough, when you go to accuse at the end,
you have
like
the other
all
options.
The wrong people are still there.
Yep.
So yeah, I think you could do that.
Doctor.
Okay, go talk to Jean. All right.
Hello again.
Hello.
Is that your? Do you? What do you? Were you? Oh.
There we go.
There it is.
Hello?
Strange. Some high. Seems.
Let's see if she...
Not very.
Yep, there we go.
Sad. Nothing. One of the gun.
Who's it? John?
Yeah.
Miles?
Oh. Forgive me.
Perfect.
This is a man.
Can we what? How?
Lord.
You're...
But I just. Oh, you.
Do you know anything about Madame Dupre?
Ah, yes. Laura, I
that's very.
Yeah.
What?
But not.
Do you?
Why?
Come on, Mr. Dupre.
What?
Don't.
Mr. Fordham, I think.
Well.
Mr. Dupre, out.
You got kicked out?
Hello again.
Hello.
Did you? What?
Okay.
No more questions.
Fordham.
There we
Are you
go.
thinking what I'm thinking?
Great.
Wait. Madame Dupre has been plus the information. It's enough to establish.
Let's go make a
Hey,
wrong
solved.
choice.
Can we talk?
Go on, I'm listening.
I think I'm ready.
Okay.
It was Juliet Montgomery, Madame Dupre's estranged daughter.
Her daughter? But why?
Madame Dupre
Yeah.
disapproved of Juliet's relationship with Mr. Martin and also tried to have her withdrawn from university. Juliet grew to hate her and wanted to be free of her overbearing and controlling influence.
So, how did she do it?
Aside from studying botany, Juliet is also interested in ethericity. She rents a room in the chum where she conducts her experiments. Among her notes, she talks about the ability to use the power to put living things into a death-like trance.
Fiendish. Nice work, Fordham. I'll pass along the information and we can make an arrest.
Awesome.
It'll be bittersweet news for Mr. Martin, I think. And of course, I'll dip into the department's Good Samaritan fund to get you proper compensation for your work. For now, go home to your wife. I'm sure I'll have something else for you to look into fairly soon.
Huh.
Nice.
Juliet Montgomery?
Yes, may I help you with something?
You're under arrest for the attempted murder of Madame Laura Dupre.
What? But how can that be?
Come with me, Miss Montgomery. We'll need to question you at the station.
Interesting.
So they do give you a little doubt there, which is nice.
And they gave me a trophy.
She must still be out at her hairdressing appointment. I'm glad we're alone because I want to.
Yes.
No, for one, this.
Look, I'm really.
Well, that's just too bad.
And what might this?
You can play dumb, and I know exactly what you're thinking.
I'm sick of games.
Have you already? Before I died, we were solving. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, stop taking the medicine.
If I stop taking it, you will.
Well, things.
I thought.
Yeah.
And I can't.
Afraid not, old friend. That's...
If you and it.
Hello.
Oh, yeah.
Well,
How was your?
Sorry. Yeah.
I only.
Okay.
And it's
Boom Boys.
Something more evocative, like the Boom Boom Boys.
definitely gets to the point. I'll give you that. Perhaps you'd best stick with the detective.
Well, I think.
Okay. This is a good pausing point. Because I need to go make food real quick.
Yes, food is important.
Yes, food is important. So we'll end the VOD here. We'll go to break for those that are watching live. Say like 10-15 minutes. Sound good?
Yeah.
Everybody good? Chat, you good? And we'll come back. And in the next case, we will kind of speed through things. I won't necessarily worry about every scene. We will see when we can get the first wrong accusation.
Sounds good.
All right, folks. If you're watching live, stick around. We will be back. If you are watching the VOD, please feel free to check something else out on the channel. Otherwise, be safe and be kind to one another. Bye-bye.